You guys know all you need to know about me, right? The rest I'll just make up. That's what writers do. They make stuff up, don't they? But not him. He's a historian. He just tells the truth. Don't you, Dave? Well, I am just really, really delighted to be here today and see such a great crowd of people show up and a lot of familiar faces. So it's fun to be back in Alamogordo. I don't know why, but it's fun to be back in Alamogordo. What's the topic? Does somebody know what the topic is that I'm supposed to be talking about? Rainey, do you know what the topic is? I had to write something down. Something about writing Tularosa. Hard Country. I wrote a book called Hard Country. Are there any questions? Well, it's really good to see you all. I only used you all 3 times in Hard Country. How about that? This book has been brewing for a good decade, if not longer. For those of you who are familiar with my crime novels, how many are familiar with my crime novels?
Got them all.
Got them all. Okay. You remember back when I wrote Tularosa? Interesting title for a book, don't you think? I created this protagonist by the name of Kevin Kearney. And I kind of had him bridge 2 worlds. I kind of had him be the modern cop with the cowboy background. And lo and behold, where did his cowboy background come from? But the Tularosa. A young child of a ranching family moved off the land when White Sands Missile Range expanded. Now, we all know that is not fiction. We all know that is truth. And we all know that there's still some families that are hurting because of that. Because of the lack of fair remuneration for the land that they gave over to the government, supposedly to protect our national security. So, with that kind of backbone to it, I had to start thinking about what was his forebears. Who were his forebears? What was his ancestry like? Who were those people who brought him? Who brought the family to the Tularosa Basin? And so I started coming down here on the sly. I can't get away with that anymore. But I started coming down here on the sly and looking over the land, talking to people, getting out, researching it, going around, picking up little reference material and research material and memoirs and self-published books and building up a library that I could use when the time came to write Hard Country. Now, aside from that, here's what I learned from that experience. I damn well better get it right. Because if I don't get it right, I'm going to hear it. You know, I'm going to hear it loud and clear that I didn't get it right. And I'm going to hear it with all you people with lovely smiles on your faces telling me I didn't get it right. So getting it right was really important. I made a big jump when I stopped writing crime fiction to begin writing a prequel to the series. With crime fiction, because of my experience in criminal justice, and because of the fact that I live in the contemporary society, writing about what cops do in the modern world wasn't a stretch for me. I mean, I had to be good at certain things in order to get a book published. I had to be good at narrative, I had to be good at character development, I had to be good at description, I had to be good at dialogue, and above all else, I had to be fairly decent at telling a story that interested people and kept them in the book. But in terms of putting it into the context of modern society, that was a no-brainer, because I live and breathe it just like you do. But to write historical fiction, I had to enter a world that I had no experience in. I had to learned what the land looked like 140 years ago, because it sure doesn't look that way now. It just simply doesn't look that way now. I had to learn what the cultural mores and taboos and standards were, because they've changed. They're not the same. I had to learn a language that was different, because people don't talk the same way now they did in 1875 or 1880. I had to learn what lived on the land, because that's changed too. There aren't any more bears in the San Andres. There used to be bears in the San Andres. Yes, there were. I'm telling you that flat out. I know you didn't know it. I want you to know it. So all these things I had to, I guess, what's the word I'm looking for? I had to inculcate in my mind and bring to life on the page. And that isn't always easy to do. So I stepped away from the crime series to write what was going to be one book about 4 generations of one family and 100 years of history on the Tularosa Basin. I got a third of the way through it, and I realized it's going to be bigger than the Oxford Dictionary. I can't do that. Hello? Let me say something about the word hello before I get back to writing Hard Country. There was no such word in 1875. There was no such word in 1880. There was no such word in 1900. Hello only came into existence after the widespread use of the telephone. When Alexander Graham Bell didn't know how to answer the phone, he started saying, ahoy! And ahoy transmigrated itself into hello. Did you know that? How many people knew it? Aha! Gotcha! Oh, you knew it. Oh. There's always one person who spoils my 100%. So anyway, I was going to write Hard Country, which was going to be about 4 generations of the Kearney family and 100 years of history. I got about a third of the way through it and sent some pages off to my editor and my agent back in New York City. New York City! I was talking to Steve about that. They wear suits in New York City too. Sorry, what can I say? My editor doesn't. He runs around in blue jeans like I do. And they were really liking the book. They were thinking this book has some legs. And I said, well, I can't do this. I can't write Hard Country in 1 volume. It's going to have to be a trilogy. And they didn't even blink an eye. They turned around with the fastest contract I've ever gotten. And I'm here to tell you today, Hard Country is only book 1 of the Kearney family saga. Get ready for book 2 and book 3, and remember Father's Day is coming. Multiple copies. Son-in-laws are going to love this book. Fathers, grandchildren, there, Cliff, grandchildren are going to love this book. Not that I'm trying to pressure you in any way, but I think you're going to be as excited about this book as I am. Short break for a water. I poured my heart and soul into this book. I used to say that writing formula fiction was something I didn't do. I thought I meant it. I actually thought that I was doing something a little bit more sophisticated than most mystery writers, because I wasn't recycling the same story over and over again. I wasn't recycling the characters, and the characters didn't stay pat and flat. They grew and developed, and the story evolved, and I was telling Kevin Kearney's life story in a series of 12 novels. Well, I moved over to historical fiction, which took a huge leap on my part, because it was a larger reach, it was a bigger scope. I was reaching out to do more as a writer, and looking back, I could tell that, yeah, I was writing formula fiction. I was just writing it a little bit differently than other people were. And I still feel really good about those 12 books. I'm not complaining in any way. They're great books, I think, in terms of that particular genre. But Hard Country and the 2 books that follow, these are my legacy books. These are the books that I want to leave behind that I think will have some lasting merit as stories told so well, the next generation will read them. And that's my hope. That's my desire. There's some wonderful characters in this book. And I've got to tell you an experience I had a Sunday or so ago at a little bookstore on Rio Grande Boulevard in the Valley in Albuquerque. I had a standing room crowd, which was great. And when it was all over, there was this older lady. I don't want to say elderly because she wasn't pretty as you.
Oh, wow.
Oh. Who was in a wheelchair, and she had what obviously was a relative with her, another woman of more indeterminate age. And they waited until everybody had left, and they approached me, and they said, "We've read your book and we love it." I said, "Well, I'm so glad to hear that. That's really nice to know. And we'd like you to inscribe the books this way: to so-and-so, Albert Jennings Fountain's great-granddaughter. To so-and-so, Albert Jennings Fountain's great-great-granddaughter." And to have descendants from that family come to the book signing and tell me that they liked what I did and would I please sign the books this way, touched my heart. Because I wanted to create from these historical characters of our past rich people on the page that readers would love, whether they know about the history or not, whether they know what happened to these people or not. So we've got Albert Jennings Fountain, we've got Albert Bacon Fall, we've got Oliver Milton Lee, we have Eugene Manlove Rhodes. Did you like what I did with Eugene Manlove Rhodes in this book? He doesn't know, he hasn't read the book. I had to make him a secondary character in the story, and I just loved putting him on the page. And you all know who he is because you got a room at the library named after him. But have you all read it? That's the question. Because if you haven't, you really should. He really cowboyed up in his westerns and wrote them right from experience and right from the heart. So I've got all kinds of characters like that. I've got a cameo with Billy the Kid. Shows up in one scene, doesn't kill anybody. I've got a cameo with Pat Garrett. Shows up in one scene, doesn't kill anybody. And I've got Victoria. And I've got the birth of the city. And a complaint about it, right while it's being born, by an old cowboy who says, "I don't see the need for another town on this damn side of Tularosa." And we've got the Indian Wars. We've got the Spanish-American War. We have drought. We have pestilence. We have flood. We have lawlessness. We've got it all. I had to leave out more history than I put in. But there was just too much. Our history in this part of the world is just too rich. And so it has to be kind of distilled down in order to fit into a 600-page book. It's the only way I could make it happen. So that's what went into this book, along with creating a whole bunch of interesting characters that, I'll tell you something, I don't think are in any way, shape, or form cliche. I think the Mexican-American characters in this book they're real, they're articulate, they have a certain amount of civility to them, they're intelligent. I think the native characters that show up in this book are incredibly real in terms of their attitudes and outlook and perceptions about what's happening in their world and to them. after the Texas cattlemen came into the basin looking for pasture. I think the cowboys are authentic. There aren't any cliches in this book. I tried to avoid every cliche that's out there about the myth of the West that we've seen time and time again on television shows and in movies and in those dime store Western novels that are just basically something you shouldn't even bother to read most of the time. And I don't think I'm being disingenuous by saying that, because a lot of them are just, you know, fippery. Is that it? Fippery? What's the word? Somebody help me out. Fippery. It's close enough. No cliches. No lone wolf. No good, everybody bad. None of the, I hate to use the word, but it's none of the crappy little phrases that get thrown around that supposedly cowboys used. I was being interviewed yesterday for the journal North, or in Santa Fe. It's the issue that the Albuquerque Journal puts out in Santa Fe. They said, "Oh, you had all these cowboy phrases. Was there any one that you particularly liked?" And I said, "There's a wonderful little phrase for hurry along that cowboys used to use. I don't know whether they still do. But it says it in a way that is just so charming. You can almost hear it when they say it. And it's, jingle your spurs. Hurry along, jingle your spurs. Can't you almost hear it? If you know what spurs sound like, can't you hear it? It's right in your ear. It's right in your head. It's right there." So, getting the language as accurate as I could, telling the story about real people that weren't comic book sketches, but instead real people with depth and character to them, and doing something else, and that is not toddying to modernity. Not toddying to what's political correct in the year 2012. Because that would have ruined it too. Because what's politically correct now, most of that didn't exist in 1885 or 1890 or 1945 or 1955. It just didn't exist. So, in order to make this book work, you see how much I had to avoid? It wasn't so much all of what I had to include, but what I had to leave out and what I had to avoid doing, that hopefully would allow you as readers and as students of the place that you live, that you call home, immerse yourself in the book without being pulled out of it. You know, without raising up and saying, "Oh my God, did he get that wrong? Oh, he didn't know what he's talking about." Well, hopefully you'll tell me if I screwed up, right? Email me at michaelmcgarrity, don't tell me I screwed up.com. I put my heart into this book. You can feel it. I hope you can hear it in my voice. I put everything I could into this book, and I plan to do the same with the next two. And I want to tell you how that's all going to shape out, because there's usually a question. Well, the first question is, when's it coming out? I have no idea. Email me at Michael McGarrity, when is it going to come out? But the next book, which I'm tentatively calling Backlands, will cover the years from the end of World War I, which is where Hard Country ends, to the end of World War II. And that's a pretty big slice of important history. That'll be followed by the third book, which I'm calling tentatively The Last Rancher, which will end at the conclusion of the Vietnam War. So basically I will have, with that trilogy, covered the 100 years that I initially thought I could do in one book. After that, I'm planning a Kearney novel. Oh, good. As if Hard Country isn't good enough. See, I screwed up again. I should have been writing 2 books at once. But thank you, darling, because every woman I know who loves my crime series loves Kevin Kearney. You know? Now, I have never met a cowgirl yet who didn't fall in love with Kevin Kearney. And most of the guys, they say, well, I don't love him, but I'd ride along with him. So I'm going to go full circle. Now, as you know, in the Apache world, in the Mescalero world, going full circle is a very important part of their culture and their mythology and their religion. This is something that has meaning to them. And so it has meaning to me too, because I cowboyed Kearney up in Tularosa with what was going to become his wife. I cowboyed him up in Dead or Alive, the 12th book in the series, with his half Mescalero Apache illegitimate son, Clayton. And now I'm going to do 2 more books and complete the circle by telling the story of what happened to Kevin Kearney that made him become a cop. And I don't know if I've got anything in the tank after that. I'm serious on that. I'm serious on that. This is what I want to do now, okay? And that's going to take me a number of years. You know, I may be looking flat at 80 by the time I get through with this. You know, and that's no joke, because I turned 72 in a couple of months. And I know I look great for my age. I'm staying at the Fairmont. So that's what's happening with all of this, okay? And I think I've talked long enough. You've heard what I've got to say. You've heard how I feel about this. You've heard what I've done, and you've heard what I'm going to do. And the only thing that's left for any of us to do is for you to ask me questions and me to answer them at Michael McGarrity. I refuse to answer that question. So please, I open it up now for any questions or comments you may have.
Yes, sir. Who's your cartographer?
Who's my photographer?
Cartographer.
The map maker.
Yes.
There's a story there. All right. They don't know how to make maps in New York City because they live on a little island. You know? I went to there's a place up in Santa Fe where they sell used and rare maps and books, and so I went there and those basic maps that you saw, I bought them, right? And I sat down, I made Xerox copies of them, and I sat down and I said, I want this here, and I want to put that there, and I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do that. And I wrote it down, and then I created a list, and I numbered it, and I said, number 1, that's where Tularosa, the village of Tularosa is. Number 2, that's where the Sacramentos are, and they run north and south. They don't run in the other direction, though. So north and south. And I went through that with the map maker, who I never spoke to. We did it all by email. I went through that 3 times to get what we got, okay? And it was so close to having to go into production, we couldn't do any more. So I spent hours of my time trying to get that as accurate as I can. And the only thing that I can say to you, sir, is it sure is a pretty map. David just told me that I'm politically incorrect because he just turned 80 and I've got a bad attitude about 80 years old. Okay, well, as long as it's not in the book, it's all right.
I have one question.
Okay.
A lot of authors, this is good, and this is great. This is a great book. When they deal with the country, it becomes a caricature. Is that your attitude?
Oh yeah, he's asking if the landscape, if the country becomes a character. It's as important as any other character in the book because, and you've heard me say this before, I think this is a setup on your part. A lot of us don't live in the country anymore, we're urban dwellers. A lot of us live in towns and cities and in automobiles and air-conditioned homes and all of those places. And so we tend, as we live at that longer and longer and longer, we tend to forget that the environment defines who we are. We are part and parcel of the environment. How we talk, how we walk, how we think, some of our values and mores come from the place that we are part of, that we live in. I mean, it's that basic to who we are. So, you live outside of town, you live in a beautiful place. If you get outside of town, you live in one of the most starkly beautiful landscapes of the West. And we can moan and groan about Holloman and White Sands and McGregor Range and Fort Bliss controlling so much of the land that runs from almost Mexico up north past Carrizozo. But one of the things is that land has come back in ways that it wouldn't have if it had been open for our exploitation. And boy, would we have exploited it. You know? So we're lucky from that standpoint to have this huge preserve of beauty out there that, you know, we can scout around and skirt around and sometimes even get there and look at it and see it. So the land is an important part of this book. I did want to tell you one thing that I forgot, and it's a little braggy on my part, okay? 3 days after the book came out, it was number 35 on the New York Times bestseller list. A week later, climbed to 29, and it's still climbing. This is my 8th or 9th New York Times bestseller. You didn't know I was such a hot shot. More questions, come on. I've got until 1 o'clock. We've got a whole other hour to go.
Are you going to sign books today?
Am I going to sign books today? For you? Not right now. Yeah, I'm going to sit up here after we get through with the questions, and I'll sign books, and we'll have a lot of fun. You know, I can't believe it. Yes, sir. No, go ahead.
I just wanted to kind of get an idea of what led you to, I guess, get into this profession of writing and telling your stories. And
Okay,
that type of
all right. How many people here love to read? How am I surprised? And among you who love to read, how many of you have ever had this little tiny thought in the back of your head that it might be fun to try to see if you could write? How many of you tried? Oh, yeah. Oh, look. Okay, so I'm not alone in being a person who loved to read, raised by a Western woman before television. We would read at night. Love to read. Well, I went to college, got a degree or two, had a professional life in criminal justice. I was doing a lot of writing. It was professional writing. It was scholarly writing. Some of it a little academic writing. And it was fine. I was pleased to be able to do it. I did it with a certain degree of success. I didn't make any money at it. You don't make any money when you write professionally like that. And in the back of my head, there was always this little thought, this little germ of an idea that it might be fun to see if I could tell a story, if I could write a book. And so in 1982, a mere, how many years ago? 40? 30? 30. Not 40, not yet, David. I finished a job. I quit a job, actually. And I went home, and my sweetie said, well, what are you going to do? And I said, I'm going to take the summer off and write a book. And she said, okay. Because she knew that was something that I talked about. So I sat down and I wrote 2 absolutely incredibly bad manuscripts. 2. Not 4, 2. But I was hooked. I was hooked. A lot of guys have they have hobbies, you know, they like to go fly fishing, or they like to go elk hunting, or they're shade tree mechanics, or they like to go to the sports bar, or they like to hang out at Hooters, you know. They have hobbies. And I didn't really have a hobby. I'm not the hobbyist kind of guy, you know. I was the kind of guy that worked 12 hours, 14-hour days, and put my heart and soul into my work. And I said, okay, so I wrote these 2 really bad books, but this is a lot of fun, and you know something, this is a really cheap hobby. I don't have to go out and buy expensive weapons, you know? I don't have to go out and buy expensive fly rods. You know, I don't have to spend my money at Hooters. I can just, you know, go into my little study and sit there and write. And so that's how it all began. And a mere 14 years later, I became an overnight sensation. There's the question back here.
You lived in this area for a while, or with the military or something? Is that right?
Yeah. I lived here a little bit before I went in the Army, then I went in the Army, and I had the kind of job where I did things that allowed me to sort of tell them where I wanted to go next. And they let me come to White Sands for a while. So yeah. You know, I remember when Main Street was Main Street in Las Cruces. And it's going to be Main Street again, thank God. Don't tear that building down on the corner of White Sands and 10th. Do not tear that building down. Don't do it. There's something worth more than money in the world, and that building is one of them. Yes?
You did this. You didn't write all 600 pages in longhand.
No, I started writing, and when I started, I did write on a Big Chief tablet. I wrote my first book on a Big Chief tablet, longhand. And I said, that sucks. So I broke out the electric typewriter, and I said, this is easier, but rewriting sucked. You know, and then I said, maybe I can afford a computer. And lo and behold, WordPerfect saved my life. And spell check made my life so, you know, it was a progression.
I want to know where those 2 really bad books are now.
Which bad books? Oh, they're burned. They're burned. They do not exist.
Oh, come on.
What exactly did you do in criminal justice?
Well, what didn't I do in criminal justice? You know, I mean, I was a deputy sheriff. I was the training and planning officer for the department. I ran the reserve program. I started the sex crimes unit for the department. I started the field officer training program. I taught at the Mexico Law Enforcement Academy. I worked for the public defender as an investigator, for the state of New Mexico as an investigator. I went in after the riots of 1980 and rebuilt the mental health program for the Department of Corrections. I ran treatment programs for ex-felons and heroin abusers, and worked with juvenile offenders, and you know, I mean, that's what I did for a quarter of a century, which prepared me to write crime fiction. Don't you think?
Yes.
So I did all that. You know. I was also a psychotherapist, so you know, it's a great combination being a psychotherapist and a cop. I had a great conviction rate. I really had a great conviction rate.
Are you from New Mexico originally?
I'm pretty much from New Mexico originally. My family's originally from Montana and Texas.
Oh,
Okay? There was somebody over here?
About 10 years ago,
Is this going to be a long story? Okay.
my wife and I were having breakfast in a motel in Silver City.
You were at a motel and so your wife was with you? Okay.
And we met a fellow who was researching for a book who looked surprisingly like you. His name was Mr. Moen.
Moen?
The Moen plumbing hardware factory.
Yeah, yeah. Right. That was Mr. Moen. Mr. Moen, who owned the plumbing factory, who looked like me, was in a motel in Silver City, and you were with your wife. And you wanted to tell me that why? Are you thinking maybe I lied and said I was Mr. Mullen? Because I never would have come up with a name like Mullen. Maybe, oh, okay, I was incognito as Mr. Mullen. Well, I've been to Silver City, and I've been at a motel in Silver City, but I don't think we were there at the same time. Could have been my doppelganger. Is that it? Come on, you can do better.
Was you in that motel with your wife?
Yeah, I brought the handcuffs and she brought the whips.
The question from a would-be writer is, what is your writing process? Do you start with an outline of the whole thing, or how do you?
Well, you know, for Hard Country, it was so off the charts in terms of what I had done and what I wanted to do. My publisher did require me to prepare an outline. So I did a 2-page outline saying this is what I'm going to do, blah, blah, blah. I'd never done one before, but I did it because I really wanted to write this book. And I finished the outline, they said fine, and then when I started writing the book, I threw the outline away because it doesn't make any sense. No, I don't outline. I'm not one of those writers. I don't know whether this makes sense to a lot of people who don't write, but for me, storytelling is in part intuitive, and you have to let the story come to you. And I'm not the only writer who believes this. There are a number of writers out there who say the same thing. And among native people, among the Aboriginals in Australia, for example, they learn their stories in sort of dream states. And it becomes part and parcel of the myth. For me, what happens is I'll have characters knock on my psychic door and say, you've got to let me in this book. You know, and I will. I mean, I just say, open the door and say, yeah, you can come into this book. So a lot of it is imagination. Now, the other thing, people say, well, do you write every day? And I said, no, I don't write every day. Then, you know, I've got a vacuum, for Christ's sake. And the point I want to make here is, I'll get to you. The point I want to make here is that it's head work. Writing isn't always sitting at a keyboard. It's head work. It's thinking about what's going to happen, thinking about something that's developing, thinking about a particular bit of the landscape, thinking about bits and pieces of information and how you want to put it together. So it's not 8 hours a day at a keyboard. Sometimes it is, yes, when the intensity is there. But a lot of it has to do with thinking things through and working things out in a kind of intuitive but intellectual, emotional way.
How much cutting and pasting do you do in your writing?
I don't do a lot of cutting and pasting. My writing changed substantially, and you might find this strange for me to say. It changed twice. It changed once, almost 7 years ago, when I stopped smoking, right? Because I didn't have that crutch anymore. And when I was a smoker, I would write very, very quickly, and I always had a cigarette going, right? And a lot of writers say that they can't quit. They're just addicted to cigarettes because writing and smoking just go together. And I can understand that. But when I stopped smoking, my pace as a writer slowed. I became a little bit more thoughtful about what I was putting on the page. Then Hard Country came along. And I found I was still at that slower pace, but I was now being a little bit more concerned about polishing everything as I went. You know, I wanted it almost as good as I could make it. I didn't want to have to go back and change it. So there was this shift. Because I've always been an A personality guy, you know? We're always going at 110, 120%. And I still, you know, have that tendency. But as a writer, I'm now much more cautious and considerate and careful as I go. Oh no, here comes. Yes. And
Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. Okay, so one of the things that I loved best about the book is the way that you weaved real characters into a fictional book. So my question is it harder to write a character that doesn't exist, or is it harder to try and incorporate a real character into your fiction?
I've never had trouble creating fictional characters because they're always a combination of real people and not real people, fictional people. I mean, a writer is, above all, an observer of life. Writers, really like to eavesdrop on conversations in restaurants, right? And they like to go to open houses so they can see how other people decorate their homes and what they put in. And they love to be at parties and listen to people talk about their failed marriages. And because this is all grist to the mill, right? And so the more that people, we live in a society where nothing is private anymore. People reveal stuff that just makes your mouth drop. You're telling me what? I don't even know you and you're telling me what? So there's that. There's that informs the development of fictional characters, okay? So that's how a fictional character in my world comes into being. They come part from that experience of observing and part from what you want that character to be, maybe morally or aesthetically or physically. And then with the real characters, that's where it got tough. Okay, what got tough in this book? Well, the Albert Jennings Fountain murder, right? Along the Tularosa. That issue is alive and well on the Tularosa Basin. And there are people who still take sides. Okay. And we've got the Lee family, who got sick and tired of hearing that Oliver Milton got accused of this goddamn crime, and he was acquitted, so leave him alone, right? Well, I had to walk that line. And I think I did a pretty good job of not picking sides. I didn't want to pick sides. But I wanted to tell what is one of the great unsolved mysteries of the West, because that is a crime that still resonates. So creating fictional characters, creating real characters on the page and giving them fictional situations was a real challenge. What did I do with Eugene Manlove Rhodes? Okay, I make him a neighbor to my Kearney family's ranch. Okay, and he shows up in the book right around the time when he's just beginning to become a writer. Okay, not quite there yet. A couple of things published in a magazine from out west, and he interacts with this family in, I think, a really kind of Eugene Manlove Rhodes way. Okay, because he starts looking at them and thinking about the story he can write about this girl that he meets who can cowboy as well as the cowboys. And then he gets to deliver a eulogy later in the book that I tried to create in such a way so that when you get to it, you'll say, that's what Eugene Manlove Rhodes would have written. Right? That's hard. It's hard to do it. And trying to pull it off was tough work at times, but I like to think I made it work.
How long did it take you to write this book?
About 3. How long did it take me to write this book? About 3 years. Because I had a false start. I did about 20,000 words, and it was crap. I just wasn't happy with it at all. So I threw it out. The book was actually 8 months late getting to my publisher. So, it was not only a bad false start, but it was a late submission. I think it's probably going to take me, I don't know how long how long the next book is going to take. But I'll tell you something, I'm at a certain age, as well as you are, where I can say, you just have to wait. Because I don't want to turn anything in that isn't right, okay? There are a number of writers that I know that are still living, who I would like to say to them, don't write any more books because, they've peaked and everything else that they're doing now is just for the money. And I don't ever want to do that. I've promised myself, and my sweetie has agreed, that should I try to do that, I'm going to get a swift boot in the rear. So when the time comes to not write, I'm going to be bright enough to know that.
With these 3 books that you want to have considered, I guess, as your legacy, have you put any thought into, and I don't know what the process would be, but like writing a screenplay or examining the possibilities of movies?
Yeah, we have, there are people that are looking at the books. There were people that looked at the crime series too. So I don't know. I mean, I've got a fellow who's a Hollywood manager who's going around and meeting with A-list producers, and nothing's happening yet. I'm not worried about it. I mean, if it happens, it happens. But I'm one of those lucky fellows who's made a comfortable living as a writer. So whether or not it ever gets translated to the silver screen or to television, it would be nice if it happens. But if it doesn't happen, I'm okay with that. I've had offers and I've turned them down because I'm not giving anything away. You know, there are a lot of people who say, "Oh, I'd love to give you an executive producer credit and you can help write the screenplay. And if you let me have an option for 5 years for $500, I'll..." Hey, you know, no country bumpkin. You know, you want to option a book for a potential film project, you're going to have to put a couple of zeros behind that 500. So I'm going to pay any attention to you. So I can think like a banker sometimes. My daughter-in-law is the assistant vice president at First National Bank of Santa Fe. I can tease him. Anything else?
What's the shortest length of time?
What's the shortest length? 30 days. I can write a book in 30 days. And it would be absolutely babble. You know, I have no idea. I've never tried to see how quickly I could write a book. That's never been on the radar in terms of an expectation I have for myself. Where did I get the name of Kevin Kearney? It's a local name, believe it or not. There was a Kearney who was a deputy sheriff. There was a Kearney who came west and was in the... I can't remember when I think he was a Confederate. He was a Confederate soldier and drove a wagon during the Civil War. So and I liked putting the two together. And then there's Stephen Watts Kearney, but he pronounces it and spells it differently, and people get confused and think I meant that. And it's an Irish name, and I'm Irish. And the history of the Irish in the West is very interesting because, first of all, they were refugees of famine, potato famine, also refugees of religious persecution, and they were low men on the totem pole, and so what kind of jobs did they have available to them outside of the major East Coast where they landed and became firemen and cops? Well, they became cowboys, they became miners, they became pony soldiers, and that's how they migrated west. So that's part of it, how it all fits together into this little head of mine.
There was a Kearney school north of Alamogordo.
Yes, there was a Kearney school, and I'm sure somebody tore it down. And when we have time for it, we're going to take that school for the visually handicapped and tear that down. It was a perfect spot for a strip mall. Aren't you glad you had me come? Any more questions? I'll take a couple more if you've got them. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, what do you like to read?
What do I like to read?
Yeah,
Well, you know, it's really interesting because as I've moved into this, I've moved away from fiction to a certain extent into nonfiction. So I've been reading memoir, I've been reading biography, I've been reading autobiography, I've been reading history. I did, though, pick up a book by Bernard DeVoto, who championed Wallace Stegner. and was a great fan of Eugene Manlove Rhodes, and was a famous writer in and of his day, and a historian to boot, called Mountain Time. And Mountain Time is a book about a Western man who serves in World War I as a doctor, winds up as a resident at a hospital in New York City, comes across a young lady that he knew from his hometown in the village he grew up in Colorado, and their lives intertwine. And it was originally published, I think, in the early 40s, and it is a really quite extraordinary book that opened my eyes a little bit in terms of what this man saw and experienced during the early part of the 20th century. So it was fiction, and it was a good novel, but it also wound up being research, too. So that's my most recent read.
You ought to try Townsend with them at home.
I've got a copy, and they are noted in my author's note. I'll have you know, sir. And if you want to check out the kind of research I did, you can go to my website, www.michaelmcgarrity.com, and under the Hard Country page, there's something called a select bibliography, and you'll see the 85 or 90 primary reference materials I used to write Hard Country. One more question. Okay. Sorry, Dave, you've had your turn. Yes, ma'am.
You need to see Roberta Haldane's new book on White Oaks. It just came out.
Really?
It's about all the different characters in
Okay.
White Oaks.
Well, I have the one by, I can't remember his name, Morris something.
So
What?
This is new, and
This
it's
is
not
new.
photographs.
Morris Parker.
Okay, okay. Right, what?
Morris Parker.
Morris Parker. I have his book.
Morris B. Parker.
Yeah, okay, well, if you'll mail me that book, I'll sure take a look at it. I am delighted to be here today. This has been a lot of fun. Rainey, thanks for, I said no to Rainey, and she wrote me back and said, "You're coming." And I looked it up and I said, well, she's married to a cop. So we got to understand, what her cultural bias is. She's used to giving orders and taking orders. So, I said, okay, I'm coming. There's no way I'm going to back out of it. So, thanks, Rainey, for this opportunity. Thank you all for coming out and listening to me today. I will be in Hastings on Sunday from 3 o'clock until 4. And after that, I'll be up in Ruidoso at Books, Etc. from 6 until 7 on Sunday. So I'll be glad to shake your hand and sign a book. And thank you again.